Dr. Hoffman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Pleasure to be here.
There has been an increased frequency of Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes in recent years. Can you explain the relationship between this and climate change, and how would you respond to those who argue that these individual extreme weather events cannot be directly attributed to climate change?
Well, in the simplest explanation, hurricanes largely derive their energy from the ocean. In fact, we know that there's a kind of a minimum sea surface temperature that needs to be present for there to be enough energy for the storms to organize and become hurricanes. So at a minimum level, there seems to be some sort of thermodynamic control of the ocean on what the atmosphere is able to do. So that is kind of first principles. The ocean needs to be warm enough to provide the atmosphere enough energy to create a hurricane. We do know that over the last few decades, there's been consistently record warm temperatures in the Atlantic sea surface temperatures in the locations where hurricanes, Atlantic basin hurricanes form. Uh, and there has been and we know that that long-term trend towards warming and warmer oceans is directly attributable to a changing climate brought on by human emissions of heat trapping gases. So, at just on first principles, the association between warm oceans and powerful hurricanes is a fairly clear relationship. However, there has not been, or there are very few, there's very limited or medium confidence, I would say, in the direct attribution between hurricane activity or like the power dissipation index or any of those kinds of metrics of hurricane systems and greenhouse gases. But the relationship between the necessary ingredients for producing a very powerful hurricane and climate change, namely the Atlantic sea surface temperatures and climate change, are intimately linked. Now, that's at the kind of base level. What are the ingredients necessary for a strong hurricane? Uh, Other sorts of things that we get alongside hurricanes have been more confidently attributed. These stronger hurricanes dropping more rainfall, for example. There have been rapid attribution studies uh, and detection and attribution studies applied to the rainfall amounts from these very powerful hurricanes. And so, while again, there are associations between what the expectation of a warmer climate does to hurricanes, there has yet to be very high and consistent confidence in linking greenhouse gas emissions to hurricane power. But everything else in between, like I said, the ingredients are there, and we've put more ingredients at the table because of climate change.
Are there any international examples of countries or cities that have effectively implemented climate adaptation strategies that you think US can learn from?
I think there are examples actually here in the US. Believe it or not, the state of Florida implemented some of the most stringent building design principles after a very powerful hurricane that many of us remember, even some of us that were growing up in the Midwest at the time. But Hurricane Andrew uh, resulted in a very, very important and long lasting and probably a very effectual change to how buildings were designed and built in Florida following Hurricane Andrew, which is in the early 90s. Um, but otherwise, you don't have to look that far afield to see places where there has been, significant change in the design of our living places that provides, excuse me, some additional resilience and adaptation to the threats of a hurricane. And in this way, I'm going to talk really quickly about storm surge and the flooding associated with that. So on the, as a hurricane approaches, it's kind of pushing a wall of water towards where people live on the coast. And so you have a much higher sea level than you would otherwise. Add on top of that that we've been raising global sea level through melting ice sheets and glaciers around the world. And then the ocean has been expanding as it's been warming up. So over time, the impact of this storm surge is superimposed on top of a sea level trend. So therefore, we have much more serious flooding when it does occur during a hurricane than it would have, decades ago before sea levels went up by about a foot or so, especially on the east coast of North America. Many communities, including here, I live in Richmond, Virginia, just an hour to the coast. We have the city of Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk has been, the site of the highest rate of sea level rise on the entire east coast of North America. And as such, people have been doing things like raising and elevating the first floor of their houses. So this enables water to flow underneath the structure instead of through it, damaging property and potentially affecting the health and safety of those people living there. Other buildings in Norfolk and around in the Hampton Roads area have incorporated ways for water to flow through them as well. We've also built natural shorelines. Those absorb some of that wave energy, dissipating the wave before it arrives on land. And then, Norfolk, Virginia also has a plan right now to install a flood wall, which in many cases, in some places, are going to be the kinds of strategies that some communities choose to have. Outside of the US, I think there are a lot of examples of communities, countries, and coastlines that have dealt with very strong tropical storms for a very long time, namely the Philippines, Japan, and anywhere kind of on the east coast of Southeast Asia, where their typhoons and super typhoons regularly approach, if not exceed, some of the maximum speed winds that we see in our North Atlantic basin hurricanes. They have very incredible vernacular architecture. So even buildings that were built very long time ago withstand these sorts of storms for a very long time. They've been part of design principles in buildings for a long time. Constructing buildings out of mass timber or just wood in general allows for a lot more flexibility to actually using the ability for the building to be less prone to tipping and making use of strapping down and reinforcing the building to allow it to sway instead of kind of bend or fall over. So I think there are a lot of different countries and then even examples here in the United States that we can use to point to and say, boy, that's what at least minimizes in some way the structural damage that tends to increase the total cost of these particular disasters like hurricanes.
According to estimates, Hurricane Helene is expected to cause about $110 billion in damages and economic losses. This will obviously hurt the economic stability of the affected states and as well as have social implications for the communities that have been devastated by the hurricane. But I want to talk about the environmental impact. What do you think are the long-term environmental consequences of this hurricane for the affected states?
Well, I think, there's so much about the long term. We can do a lot of speculation about what the long term implications of a storm like this are. But, the erosion brought on by such torrential flooding is something that will drastically change the landscape of many of these small hollers, that were built. People were kind of building up in these quiet places, otherwise seen as very quiet places between, mountain ranges and ridges. And they're some of the most beautiful landscapes that we have in the Southeast. And but ultimately, they are where water will go first to navigate its way to its base level, or to sea level, or to a larger body of water. And so the amount of erosion that we saw occur in some places, which had drastic impacts to road infrastructure and ways to connect these communities together, that I think that will be one of the lasting implications, is a very, very clear effect on the topography of these places brought on by these very torrential flooding events. Um, I think the potential for debris and the different things that made up these towns that were washed away will have a lasting impact on some of these ecosystems through making its way into the river systems, and otherwise items that we would have never wanted to be in there to lose from our communities. I think that's a very a challenging aspect of when these flooding situations happen. A lot of our material goods are washed away, and so there are aspects to that that are complicated from an environmental perspective. And then we tend to see also these impacts on biodiversity, loss of tree, like natural infrastructure in our cities. If you have a lot of downed trees, that affects the ability for those landscapes to soak up water should another storm come through in the immediate future. We see damage to coastal ecosystems, the loss of aquatic water quality that affects these sorts of fish and other sorts of aquaculture related ecosystems. So really, a storm of this magnitude and severity, beyond the very real and tragic human cost, will have also downstream impacts and implications from its influence on the local ecology and ecosystem.
Final question, Dr. Hoffman. As climate change gets worse, what do you think are the most urgent actions scientists, lawmakers, or citizens can take to effectively address these challenges?
For every dollar that we invest in adaptation, so proactively preparing ourselves and our communities for these types of climate related disasters, for every dollar that we spend on that, we get several dollars back in avoided costs in the future. I think like some of the adaptation numbers I see is for every dollar we spend now, we get $6 of societal benefit in the future. That is a huge return on investment. I think anyone would be willing to take that kind of long-term investment. Even if you're not a stock market pro, for every dollar you put in, you get $6 back. That's a huge benefit. And so what this particular storm, among the many others that we've seen affect North Carolina and coastal communities in Florida, we see this happen over and over again. And what we're not seeing is the attendant and proactive preparation for these sorts of impacts in other similarly configured communities. I'm a Virginian. We've tragically lost several lives in Virginia. Virginians have died in these events. North Carolinians have died in these events. People across the Southeast, perish in these very common disasters, and they're becoming more common. And when they do happen, they tend to be stronger. So, what are we doing to prepare our communities to be more absorbent and porous to these waters? What are we doing to prepare the infrastructure, the sewer systems, and the road systems to be able to withstand the stressors of a more intense rainfall amount than 100 years ago? What are we doing to prepare our communities to respond immediately after the implications of these things? Um, I think the investment in adaptation and resilience cannot be understated when we see every year another community having the same kinds of consequences from these otherwise climate change intensified natural disasters. Um, and having been the lead author of the Southeast chapter of the Fifth National Climate Assessment, we wrote about all of this in detail, and how the Southeast bears the most wide range and most significant burden when it comes to climate change and its impacts on its long-term economic vitality. So investing now will protect more in the future. And that's what we all want. We all want our communities to be able to not only return to normal after something like this, which many people that I know, colleagues of mine in Asheville and the surrounding counties in southwestern Virginia, are afraid that it might not ever get back to normal. What we want is our communities to be able to get back to normal very quickly. And that's resilience. But not only that, but what happens into the future? How do we better prepare our communities? How do we remove inequities in the impacts? How do we invest equitably to prepare the communities that need it the most and first are the ones that are receiving that disaster relief and resilience money? Those are the sorts of things that all communities, regardless of where you are when the last storm was, we can be having these conversations and proactively investing in adaptation and resilience to protect life and property now and into the future.
Thank you for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Kahora. Thank you so much. Or Zahor, excuse me.
No,
Nice to see you and meet you.
nice to see you. Thank you.